I'm looking in as an outside observer. I have a lot of contacts now because I've made contacts with other journalists. I think I'm one of the only from the people from the cultural left who's out there immersing himself in both sides of this protest and going back and forth so I keyed into that. People were asking me, well, who was it? Who was it? Sure, that front line had to be paramilitary. They had to be versed in tactics. The fellow that we talked about who defined himself as Federalist, but were saying that there are some neo-Nazi leanings there, and he defines himself as an extremist. He said he studied tape. He said, you don't know how many hours of video I've watched. I studied Antifa, and he calls them Antifa. And one thing, when we spoke last time, I parsed when I say I call Antifa aligned groups. That's the terminology I use because there is no one singular Antifa. And part of the belief that there is one singular Antifa that has communist leanings, that vacuum of information, our inability as the press to say exactly what's been going on since June and define that has left it open for conspiracy, I would argue. And so these cultures of conspiracy are filling in the blanks with their own information. And I held a very interesting, and all three of us got heat. On New Year's Eve, I did a live stream with a Black Lives Matter organizer from Utah and a Proud Boys chapter leader from Utah as well, who befriended each other over the summer and started debating each other. And they struck up this friendship, and they realized that they were fighting about all this other stuff, but they had several points of commonality of interest when it came to police reform, prison reform, getting big money out of the elections, dealing with housing. They agreed on all of these fronts, and yet they were fighting about political identification. And they came forward right after the president mentioned the Proud Boys. Well, actually, it was Joe Biden that mentioned it in the debate, and the president notoriously said, stand back and stand by. And during that, they came out a couple days later, and they got very little coverage. I think BET and maybe one right-wing publication wrote something about it, but it didn't get much play. That they realized, oh my gosh, we have all these points of commonality, that we actually agree on stuff. We did this live stream, and even the Proud Boy was saying, I'm nervous because there are people who have military experience that are pissed off, that feel disenfranchised. And I said, well, what did we expect, in the sense that if you don't call it, if you're the media and you don't call it objectively, you don't tell it like it is since June, wouldn't we think that other people would take these tactics once they're disenfranchised, and it would all boomerang back on us? Didn't we have the foresight to know that if we didn't say anything and let all these groups play out locally using insurrectionary tactics, and all the way from, I saw skateboard, everything that from the helmets to the gas masks, the skateboard to the pedestrian tools. I personally did not see one gun the whole time I was there. And that's significant because the people on the front, apparently, from photos, and it would be interesting to find out how many guns were there, but among the populous crowd, there were people with flak jackets, body armor, but there weren't people with arms that I saw. So it would have to have been a very small minority. But that all works under that tactic of using these pedestrian. I saw a woman coming out with a chair, a leg to a desk, like one of these ornate, swervy, and it had been pulled off of a desk, and she was holding it like a weapon. And so this idea of using makeshift weaponry from pedestrian materials, that all comes from the leftist movement, and what we saw over the summer of insurrectionist tactics from anarcho Antifa aligned groups. And I need to get to the difference between anarchist and Antifa. There's been a lot of talk out there. The Antifa groups were not a part of this because it's ideologically opposite of what they were saying. Black Lives Matter DC said, everybody stay at home. They said that. At the same time, some affinity groups were planning Black Bloc action, but presumably at night at Black Lives Matter Plaza, they were preparing for another repeat of what I was expecting to cover, which was November the 14th and December the 12th, when those two groups clashed at night and started just LARPing and beating on each other. So, yeah, go on.
So
those groups stayed home. Those groups, for all I know,
they stayed home.
They had a couple of documenters that went in to take pictures, but from what we could see, they did not enter the Capitol. They were culturally just there as a fly on the wall.
Okay. There are a couple things going on here, and I have to apologize to my audience here. There are so many threads here that it is very hard to navigate this story and really paint it in any disciplined way. And I regard that as a symptom of the fact that there is a force that tries to prevent you from crossing the line. It's one thing to report on one side or the other, but it's a sin to report on both. It's a sin to try to figure out what the middle ground is, where each side has it wrong, what they might have right. And so the point is, there are very few people doing what you're doing. There are very few people doing what I'm doing. The reason there are very few people is that the pushback that you get, and the pushback even in terms of, having your channels deplatformed and things like this, makes it a very hard road to navigate. So what that means is that when somebody like you, who has seen both sides of this, has been in the street, has circulated in both settings, that when you come to the fore, there are just too many things to say. I have the sense that we could go for 24 hours and not fully exhaust all of the threads that are here. So anyway, I'm not sure exactly what to do about that. But yes, the tactics are deliberately confusing. They reside below a certain threshold so that it is much harder to tell the story. So in Portland, for example, we had the Antifa BLM anarchists launching fireworks at police officers and federal buildings, right? Fireworks has a kind of a festive connotation. It sounds fun and dramatic. These are explosives. Are they explosives designed to do a huge amount of damage? They are not. Are they dangerous? Yes, if you point them at somebody. So anyway, the point is it's very hard to report what happened, The fact that firearms were not at least common amongst those who stormed the Capitol is a fascinating fact, right? These are almost certain to be very well-armed people who left their weapons at home while storming the Capitol, right? Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what that says, but it certainly says something.
Well, yes, there were not guns everywhere. We've seen the pictures in Michigan when there were. And one note, this protest at the Capitol, Salem, Oregon, you have to see that was the canary in the coal mine, that you had, for the first time, right-wing riots before Christmas at the Oregon Capitol. It almost, when you look back at that video, you think, oh my gosh, that was just a small scale idea of what this sort of feeling was coming from the right populist crowd. That was, the Proud Boys did not show up. If they were there, you wouldn't know. And their chairman said, we're going to wear black. And he said that we all thought in reference to expected clashes with Antifa-aligned activist groups. But no, if they were there were lots of people that were all in black, and you couldn't tell who was who. And this is something that I blogged the night of the 5th, which is how will we know who is who? Even on the night of the 5th, when I was at Black Lives Matter Plaza, and anti-COVID restriction, anti-government overreach types were yelling through the bullhorn and clashing with police, trying to get closer into Black Lives Matter Plaza. And there were some clashes. We saw Proud Boys who were in all black. And we also saw some people wearing the orange beanies of Shut Down DC, which is the group that famously showed up at, was it Josh Hawley's residence outside and with a megaphone. And so we saw some rightists or people on the right wearing these, people were appropriating left-wing accoutrements and costuming.
Okay, so this takes me back to something you said a few minutes ago, which I really want to highlight.
Yeah.
There is what you discovered, where you have a BLM activist and a Proud Boy discovering that they have a great deal in common, that there are things they disagree over, but actually bonding over the number of things that ought to unite them, is, I think, the big hidden story here. That in some sense we are fiercely divided so that we will not be fiercely united, right? And this is why I started the unity movement. This is exactly the danger I saw coming out of this election. And the idea is there is a general sense of frustration at basically the public being frozen out of the well-being that is generated by our system, increasingly systematically frozen out by a pervasive culture of corruption, much of which is legal. And so the point is, if you have a legal culture of corruption that causes the government to do the bidding of those who can pay to have their bidding done at the expense of the public, it will create massive unrest and distrust. And the fact that that unrest and distrust is divided into factions that are pointed at each other, rather than there being a broad recognition that actually, yes, Americans have a right to be very angry with what has become of their governmental structure. And neither blue nor red is the solution to it. Blue and red are the problem. And how we Americans address that is a very difficult puzzle. Increasingly, this week, I see people toying with ideas of the right scale, right? New political parties, a recognition that the parties that we have are simply too compromised to be rescued. That seems to me obvious, right? But people are now discussing it. And so, in any case, what I want to point out is that you're committing a kind of physical heresy by moving between these camps and listening to them both, because what you're going to find, what you are finding, what I'm finding by being someone from what I would say is the far left, not the far left that's in the street, but I come from a very left perspective, and I talk to all kinds of people on the right who are not what I was led to believe they would be, right?
Yeah, same.
So that discovery is in some sense, the greatest threat to the narrative engine that wants everybody to stick to one version of events that tells them exactly who their enemy is and what danger that enemy poses, and then turns off their processes of reason so they can't discover that's not even true, right? And this, the events at the Capitol play right into this, but, in some sense, you were there. You're the key to understanding what actually happened.
Well, I saw so many similarities, and I tried to discuss it, and of course, maybe it was too early, too soon, because bringing this stuff up, that I was seeing the similar tactics, a similar strain of populism, and one thing that I said is a riot is a riot is a riot, and it's just the same stuff I'm seeing under different banners, and people just got furious with me. And I understand that. I'm not talking about the moral alliance to causes and how you interpret them. And I'm talking about the people there, what they were talking about as far as the Constitution. And again, it's defining the crowd. They define themselves united under patriotism. So while they were trashing the Capitol, they weren't burning it. And there's some other significant thing. There's some significant images that are being cherry-picked. Again, this was a 5-hour ordeal in which you had tens of thousands that were marching in and breaking police lines that were completely unprepared for this level of riot, mass riot. This was just unlike anything I've ever seen in my life.